Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by SharedServicesLink and sponsored by Consider Solutions. Today, we will be looking at the Huntsman story, their global process owners, and internal control. My name is Sarah Fain, and I am the Head of Research at SharedServicesLink, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Arlene Nelson, who's the Senior Director of Internal Controls and Global Business Processes at Huntsman, and Dan French, who's the founder and CEO of Consider Solutions. You, of course, have an important role to play in today's webinar, and that is to make sure that you get your questions answered. Please use this opportunity to send us your questions, and we will be taking questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Touching briefly on the agenda for today, we'll open up with a little bit of more context on what global process ownership is and looks like. Arlene from Huntsman will then give some insight into the Huntsman journey, how internal controls and Sarbanes-Oxley has played out at Huntsman, as well as the evolution of the global business process owner, their strategies and tactics, and the road ahead. Dan French from Consider Solutions will then provide some more insight into GPOs tools and the frameworks, some thoughts for the journey, and again, we'll have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. So touching on the context for today, since the advent of Sarbanes-Oxley, we've seen a lot of companies have implemented, refined, consolidated much of their internal controls framework. Now, traditionally, internal controls is something that's been the responsibility of a dedicated team, often reporting into finance. However, we're finding, as a lot of this legwork has been done, we're now seeing internal controls being handed over to the global process owner's mandate, for many making it another notch on the belt of mature GPOs. So with that, I'll now hand you over to Dan French of Consider Solutions, who will give some more insight into the global process owner journey.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. Just to say a few words about why we at Consider Solutions are involved in this discussion. We're helping organizations on this road to world-class finance, which is defined in that image there as helping drive better business results, reduce the cost of finance, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And the three areas that are really relevant there, you see financial control and compliance, risk assurance, and finance process optimization. And this webcast and this discussion has come out of a confluence of control and compliance and process optimization as led by the global process owner. And we've certainly had some interesting insights on this. So that gives you a little view about why we're here, and the sort of companies we serve are on this chart here. You see some logos you'll recognize. They're around the world. I think they speak for themselves. So let's just talk a little bit about the direction of travel in terms of global process ownership and what are we doing in finance, the finance function, and the road to shared services. There's lots of these charts about. I try to be fair and even-handed in offering thanks to different Big Four or transformation providers. So this is a KPMG chart. And you know, most of us have seen this shift pretty starkly, certainly in the 2000s in the with the white heat of Sarbanes-Oxley. Financial controls was the big effort and focus and cost, and we, maybe we went overboard on that, but that has been that was a massive shift. And then we've seen the transformation as we have driven down the cost of financial operations, moved to standardization, simplification, automation, and shared services. The cost of financial operations has continued to reduce. Cost and effort in financial controls has reduced because we've standardized, we've optimized, we focused on real risk and not perceived risk. And of course now the major focus is on financial performance. And this is really where the global process owner has come into his own or her own, but it's important to see that process ownership covers all three of those disciplines, both performance, risk, and operations. So yeah, that's a kind of interesting kind of context for where we sit today, and also the challenge for the global process owner. So what is a global process owner? I'm sure those of you who are one know what it is your mandate is, but I think we all know that although this term is very popular, there's kind of different levels of kind of depth to what the role entails. So there is some different kind of, if you like, levels of my perception of global process ownership. So the ownership, the end-to-end process across functional silos, across geography, across business units. There's responsibility for performance of the process and achievement of the objectives, being accountable for governance and control of the process, and the authority, accountability, ability, and budget to drive change. Now, very few people have all of those parts to their mandate, but it's interesting to consider where you sit in that role. So you have a chance to get involved. We have some polls for you. So we have a question here about your primary job role and relevance to this discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to start that poll.
Thank you very much. So coming up on your screen now is the first poll question of the webinar, and that is, what is your primary job role? How would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as a shared services leader, a global process owner, a business process owner, operator, manager, stakeholder? Are you internal controls or an audit and assurance? Or do you work most closely with IT and your ERP? So please pick the option that best matches your role, and it's good to see lots of you voting. We've just got about 60% of you, and we will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and results will be coming up on your screen. So interesting to see here that actually most of you are global process owners or in internal controls. What do you make of this split, Dan?
Well, it means we're talking to the right audience, Sarah. That's good news. No, I think it's kind of what you might expect. It's good to see kind of a healthy balance between global process ownership and the internal financial controls folks. There's a reasonable number of people who actually operate or are involved in the business process themselves or a stakeholder in it. I think it's a pretty healthy balance. So we've got some interesting discussion to have. So thank you. So. Let's talk then a little bit about some of the challenge for the global process owner, and really, again, this is more about context. And this is a number of little images. I'm kind of starting from the top right and moving around counterclockwise. But we're all in businesses now where we've tried to integrate end-to-end processes globally. No one person can really see the start and end of process execution anymore. In the old days, everyone knew, start to end a process. There was one line of sight over it, whether it was a local controller or some other line manager. But now, we've got, purchase requests being raised in Australia, turned into purchase orders in Indonesia for, vendors in China to deliver to Houston, Texas, and for the accounting reconciliations and payables to be done out of Budapest. Now, that's globally integrated businesses. It's very difficult now to see end-to-end process execution in human line of sight. So that gives us a big challenge. It also gives us a big opportunity. By the same token, with all the wonderful implementation of our sophisticated ERPs and other systems, the fact is not much has changed in terms of fraud, waste, and error. The ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, perhaps this is a little bit like turkeys voting for Christmas or not voting for Christmas because they want to maintain this percentage. But the evidence is we haven't managed to drive out as much of the waste and error, and fraud is a kind of separate issue but related because it is a form of waste. We haven't managed to drive all that out. Then you see the PwC assessment there of where some of these issues happen. And then getting around to the bottom right, despite, again, all the wonderful processes and technologies put in place, you'd think it'd be getting easier and cheaper and more effective to provide reasonable assurance over our operations, but audit fees aren't going down anytime quickly. So, that's kind of part of the context of the challenge for the process owner as well. So we know that standardization and simplification are key, is a key agenda for the process owner. It's a key question. So I've got this image here about process standardization and internal control, the old car park. Many of you who know me will have seen this slide many times before. This is my favorite picture. I just like to use this just to remind ourselves that we put in standardization and simplification to drive operating efficiency, but also to drive compliance. And we put in controls to help that happen. So this example here is a barrier to a parking lot. And you can imagine how it works. You show your ID card, it opens because it recognizes you, you drive in, and the same on the way out. and that control gets tested every quarter, and it's fine. It works 100% of the time. Although, when the snow falls, you realize what's really happening. I think one of the challenges for the global process owner, one of the challenges for standardization, simplification, and efficiency is that with all the wonderful controls we put in place, we still have to take a view of the tire tracks, and that's part of our job, to work out how we do that. And then, again, thinking of the challenges for the global process owner, that we see kind of 4 pillars of success at a high level. I just see this pretty simple, but I like it because it is simple. Helping drive efficiency, speed and quality in the process, helping drive effectiveness, which is doing the right things, and effective stewardship and risk management, relevance to the business units we serve, and better business partnering to get better outcomes. So one more poll for you to get involved in, one of the next few polls. So we're going to be asking you, how embedded is internal control in your global process ownership model? And obviously, since this is pertinent to the discussion, it's an important one. So I will ask Sarah again to lead this off.
Thank you very much, Dan. So on your screen, you should see the next poll. And as Dan said, we want to know how embedded internal control is in your GPO model. Would you say that this model is still very much being defined in your role? Or would you say internal control is still out of scope for the GPO? Do you feel that internal control is actually a separate responsibility, but coordinated? Would you say that the GPO is a key stakeholder in internal control? Or in your case, does the GPO have ultimate ownership of internal control for their process? So again, good to see lots of you voting. We are at over 60%. So please do check the option most relevant to your situation, and I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the results will be coming up on your screen. Interesting to see here, we actually have a pretty good spread, and the only one that is really low on the list here is that internal control out of scope for GPO. Everyone else falls somewhere else on the spectrum there. Dan, what do you make of this?
Well, I think that's very interesting. I'm not surprised that the model's still being defined. I'm not surprised also that some people feel internal control is out of scope. There's no real dominant position here, and maybe it's because we haven't all worked out what the perfect model is, but there is no doubt at all from the discussions we're having with companies around the world that there's a growing realization that you cannot have internal controls being a completely separate thing, because it relates to the governance of a process. So that's really helpful, and hopefully you all find the rest of this discussion useful in formulating your views. So thanks, Sarah. Which all of this, of course, is a lovely introduction to Arlene Nelson, who leads internal control and business process ownership at the Huntsman Corporation, one of the world's leading chemical firms. And Arlene's going to talk to us about her journey and the journey at Huntsman from internal controls and the move into global process ownership. Arlene.
Well, thank you, Dan. I want to say that our journey at Huntsman began about 10 years ago at the advent of the regulation for Sarbanes-Oxley. We are, as a company, are always constantly changing and evolving through either acquisitions or divestitures, and we understand the role of compliance and what internal controls brings to our company. We have integrated them into the business process and to manage the risks. And we as a company also know that it's strategic that they are not simply looked at as simply as silos, but as part of the process. This journey, though, has taken on many years, and who better that we think can take us on this journey now is but the global process owner. So as we begin to discuss the agenda today, we want to talk about what exactly we will talk about the structure, where internal controls in the global process owner's journey has begun, and where we have transitioned from looking at controls at a financial perspective, but rather into the whole fabric of the company. The role of the global process owner and their importance in the business and integrating them into the process, as well as discussing the role of the GPPO, why the process needs to be standardized, and what would help in achieving a global structure. Next, we will also talk about the Global Governance Committee and the definition thereof. So let's begin our little discussion now as to what exactly Huntsman's company is in itself. We are a global manufacturer and a marketer of differentiated chemicals. Our company has different divisions, and as you can see from this photo here, we have 5 divisions, and in those divisions we deal with chemicals that are in plastics, automotive, aviation, construction, healthcare, personal care products, and appliances and packaging. You may be familiar with Huntsman from its origination as being the company that has developed the clamshell that you would find at your local McDonald's. So that's where we originated from. But we have these 5 different divisions, and they're very specific in each. As a matter of fact, we can now look at what our financial structure is, and you can see that we are a $10 billion company that has a variety of products, and that we look at things from different perspectives. We have revenues of $10 billion, and we have the different areas of our end markets, and we are now going to show you the presence that we have within the globe. We are located around the country, around the world, and have about 15,000 employees. Our footprint is not just with offices in these strategic locations, but we also have shared services locations within the world, primarily within the U.S., Europe, Kuala Lumpur, and in India. So as you can see, we do have the structure, we do have the shared services, and now I want to show you what the actual global process owners began as. We began, like I said, about 10 years ago with these 5 different divisions. And within each of these divisions, we set up a internal control framework. But each of these divisions have their specific way of evaluating not only their IT structure, because they each had their own specific instance of SAP, but also they had their own individual approach to looking at what their processes should be. So within that, you could see that there were multiple individuals or process owners that would have a certain perspective in each one of their instances. We also had, separately from that, a group that was already migrating over toward the accounts payable and as well as the purchasing shared service picture. And so we have a multitude of ways of looking at things, but not one common practice. So in comes internal controls, and we decide we need to go and develop a way of assisting the businesses in how to go and have a singular approach. So our BPOs were originally tasked with just looking at change tickets. That's the simplistic look at looking at configuration, seeing where the issues were within SAP, but not really getting involved in any projects. But as soon as we started integrating with the shared services, we started looking at ways of saying, what does the business process owner bring to the picture besides just approving tickets? So we realized that they needed to be involved within the process and be integrated in looking at where are the pain points within the process. And so we further looked at where could we go and get the best bang for our bucks. And so we looked at the idea of looking at a complete business cycle from order to cash, purchase to pay, or record to report. And as the driver, and internal controls being looking at it more from a IT perspective or a change management perspective, we thought that the businesses could actually win by using these individuals as people that could actually drive change within the process, change within and developing stricter controls. So what exactly is the role of the business process manager? We look at this and say that we need someone who has both the business and technical knowledge to manage the overall global business process cycle. We also looked at it to say, how can they identify critical dependencies? Where are the points and priorities within the process? They should be a liaison between the stakeholders. And who are those stakeholders? IT is the stakeholder. A business process leadership person is a stakeholder. Someone that is involved on the day-to-day end of activities is a stakeholder. So we need to liaise with all these stakeholders and identify what needs to be changed. Now, technology comes into the picture, but it comes into the picture after we understand what the process is about. Have we mapped out the process? Have we looked at to see where are the pain points within the controls? Do we see issues that we need to resolve? So we decided to go and establish a business process standardization governance strategy. And so when we look at that governance strategy, we looked and said, what are the structures that we need to identify for the roles of the stakeholders? We needed to set up some goals and responsibilities. So for the structure, we're looking at standardizing the governance strategy and looking at how we can go and develop these guiding principles. Additionally, we wanted to find out what are the processes that we are looking at, and what are the common set of actions that we need to take, and how do we deal with the changes that are occurring within these processes. So we needed to identify the systems and the tools that we use within this process. So it's simply not only looking at who are the roles and who are the stakeholders, but we have to define rules of engagement. We have to look at what the process holds within itself, and then we need to see what tools we need to identify that are within that process. So all of those together gives us a direction of where we should be headed. So as we looked at that, we said we had a previous structure, as we had defined in the previous slide, which was made up of a variety of individuals within their silos. And then we said, well, no, this is not where we need to look at where we need to be redefined. So we kind of laid it out in 4 quadrants. We said, what are the quadrants of interest that we need stakeholders? Well, first of all, we understand that data in is as good as it comes to us, so we need to make sure that data is good data. We also need to make sure that we're engaged properly with our IT counterparts, and we also need to ensure that the compliance or that the controls that are within our framework are embedded within our process. And who better to go and integrate all that activity would be someone within the business process ownership model. And those individuals are the ones that are responsible for being the coordinated effort of making sure that the data is true and correct, that the IT is getting the information that they need and the changes are being done properly, and that the controls are within the process are being complied according to what is our standards. So now we define exactly what the roles and stakeholders are, and now we need to look at what our defining guiding principles of our governance is. So we began with the development of a governance structure, and an outgrowth from our initial meeting was with our group of individuals that were involved in this discussion, and from that we decided what was going to be our governance principles. Well, it was not only from looking at individuals within internally to Huntsman, but rather also we looked at individuals externally, and we looked at actually some of the information that we received from SharedServicesLink. they have been providing a number of seminars, and within those seminars there is value added because you can go and understand what is being provided as way of giving you some new insight as to how to improve your process. And so we took this journey and we looked and said what we needed to do was to make sure that we had a repository of all our financial processes. We also needed to make sure that this repository included the systems, the reports, and the controls that we want within the process. So as you would look at a mapping, you could actually say that if you put this mapping together on a simple Excel spreadsheet, you could see who are the individuals responsible, who are the people, what are the processes or the actually the IT applications that get affected by it. And so we put this all together and developed our governance principles, and then we decided what else do we need to go and include. And one of the things we looked at is that we need to make sure that our BPOs are trained sufficiently and that they are getting the proper training internally, as well as an understanding of how they affect other platforms. So we communicate on a quarterly basis with our group of BPOs to go and inform them of what the other process owners within their functions are doing and seeing where the connections are. We also provide continuous improvement initiatives so that we can go and develop ways to look at things in a better way. So we have moved further along the process, and then we said, what are our governance committee goals? Where do we need to do, what to do within this? We wanted to go and develop functional committees. And so as we established those, we said we wanted the BPOs as well as IT involved. We didn't think that BPOs in themselves should be involved, but rather we thought that as a group, they should also be integrated in our discussions so that we're all on the same page. We understand there are interdependencies between our groups, and so this whole evolution of the global process owner was developed, not just to keep it at a level with at each individual business division, but rather as a body of individuals based on their business cycle, but also as a complete whole body of process owners where we could share ideas. So an output of that was developing a charter. And so the charter that we developed, and which is currently in draft mode, because we, like I said at the beginning, we are always changing, evolving, and having other initiatives, has been to develop this as our first go-round. We looked at who should be involved, what our objectives should be, and then what our remit will be. We have identified who the individuals should be in this group, and then we said we wanted to have this meeting on a monthly basis. Incomes change. Change within your company means that certain things get put to the side. So as we speak, this is where we're at this moment in our journey, is that we are actually at a standstill because with other things get in the way, and then what happens is that we end up having to put certain of our initiatives, even the global process ownership, to the side until we have the opportunity to go and bring this more into fruition. So we are looking at this, and we will be working toward developing it stronger, but at least we have, I would call it, a straw man out there with some of the elements that we're looking to develop. What we need to look at as we are at this point or this juncture is what is our process definition? Do we know what our order to cash, maybe our record to report or source to pay processes are from end to end? Because the goal is to have that end-to-end process. to have that operational consistency across each of those process cycles. So we are understanding that the organization needs to be defined and be fully integrated. We understand that the data needs to be fully vetted, that we have good data, and that the systems are only ancillary to our processes, and they enhance our processes, but actually the organization and the data and the controls are the important elements that we need to ensure are within our business cycle. Now, we are looking at these and we're continuing on this journey, and we know that we want to go and use those supporting components to address our issues. So we look first at Sarbanes-Oxley. We made it a requirement to our business. We looked to our auditors to see what information we needed to define within the process. And now we're moving forward to develop these consistencies within the business practices itself. We have reviewed the data and the systems, and now we need to bring standardization. Standardization is probably the hardest thing to encapsulate within a company that has 5 different divisions. You are looking at things from different perspectives. You're having different initiatives from each group, and you are come to the point where you're trying to corral a group of individuals to come under one umbrella. And that's where I think that the journey that we are talking about here is that we've come from looking at things singularly within silos, within divisions, moved on our journey into shared services, saw the benefits of shared services, and now have moved on in our journey to look at actually what can the global process owner bring to the picture. And we believe that they can actually bring this cohesion, bring the further development of standardization, and only use what we consider our IT functions and our applications as kind of the endpoint that brings and enhances the future of what a process should be, and standardizing that. So as we look toward future strategies, what do we need? Who do we need? Well, first of all, we need senior management support and their buy-in. And that's because of the area of global process owners. People do not see the benefit of they think that a process owner works with changes, looks at the IT structure, but may not see the added value of bringing the cohesion between the controls, between the process itself, and between using IT applications to the fullest. So look for your senior management buy-in, get a sponsor to go and support you in that. And we specifically have looked at pain points. We look at the individual compliance audit findings. We find that those audit findings are the ones that cause pain points to an individual division. And so if you can bring improvement to that finding where it is remediated and improved the process itself, you will get a good win from management and see that there are benefits within the global process owners. So my final point is that you need to focus on a process and only put your implementation of tools until after you have actually documented your process, have those individuals earmarked as the ones that own the process, and then have the management support for that process. And only then will I see the journey be fulfilled. Dan?
Thanks very much, Arlene, for that. Take us through the story and the journey at Huntsman, and see the scale and the diversity of the business and some of the challenges you have. And it's been really helpful to understand. So let's try and take some observations from that and look at some tools and frameworks and conclusions that might help. I think the road to success is littered with sharp left turns and right turns, and sometimes not always turns that we expect to make. So I think the first thing to remember is that Arlene talked about some of the challenges, some things that get held up. It's important to keep your eye on the end game, and although we might like to believe this is one simple, straight, wide road, there's an awful lot of wiggling around to do. So that's true for any initiative. So I do think the first thing we will need is a framework, and we talked a little bit about how you define the job role of the global process owner, and different companies. I had 4 sort of progressively more significant definitions. I think every company has to take both what they want to achieve and also what they're ready for at a point in time, even though things can mature. But also, we need to have a framework for how do we go about implementing a new way of managing our business. So if you look at this, this pentagon here, there's 10 kind of key themes, and I just encourage people to use this as a way of stimulating debate, running workshops, getting consensus on what the issues are and what the priorities are. So we start at 1 o'clock. Stakeholder management. Yeah, when every initiative we do, stakeholder management is important. But if you're trying to work out a new way of managing your end-to-end processes globally, across business units, across geographies, this isn't just the usual, let's get people behind us. This is about ensuring that the executives are fully behind the vision of an end-to-end process, driving efficiency, effectiveness, and compliance, and what that means, both in terms of benefit, but what it means in cost. So stakeholder management, stakeholder alignment. Also, bear in mind that the executive that signs off on global process ownership might move on in a year's time. How do we make sure the executive that takes his role is equally aligned? So that's I think that is probably more critical in global process ownership than it is in most initiatives, because of the fundamental structural nature of it, and also perhaps the fear of change. Organization structure and governance. So how do we run global process ownership as a structure? How do we govern it? How do we steer it? Service catalog, which is what things are we actually trying to give to our internal customers? What is the set of things we're trying to deliver? What's the value we're trying to deliver? Because that's an important part of making sure people are bought into it, both on the stakeholder side and on the supply and on the receiving side. Process design. Obviously, if you're a global process owner, you're responsible for the design and refinement of the process. So that's kind of obvious, but it isn't going to work if you don't have the other pieces there. Process placement and sourcing. This used to be the hot topic. Where are we putting the processes? Are we putting it to low-cost places, or where are we distributing it? We all understand that, but it's important to have an assessment of where are we today, and what's our aspiration for that. Risk control and compliance. Now, this is the key discussion behind this webcast. There's a lot of organizations that don't even have this on the discussion for the GPO, and if you don't have that on the discussion, you cannot consider that you've got a view of a global process, because risk control and compliance relevant to a process is absolutely central. So that's so again, just getting an assessment and consensus on where are we today with this for this process, where are we, where's our aspiration, and what are the priorities. KPIs, analytics, insights. So how do we make sure we're making progress down in our global processes the way we want? That's pretty key. Again, where are we today? What do we aspire to? What are the priorities? Automation and enabling technology. Arlene made it very clear that you've got to get all the rest right before you worry about technology. But it's one of the 10 items to worry about. Again, it's no more dominant than the end of the others. Skills and capability. Critical in dealing with cross-functional stakeholders, cross-divisional. We're talking about some pretty hardcore skills requirements here. So you've got to work out where are we today, what do we need, how do we get them, do we have them, do we need to develop them internally, do we need to bring them in? Then business service management is about how do we make sure that as we've implemented global process, how do we make sure the people that benefit from it, our internal customers and external customers, get the value from it they want? How do we know if they're being successful? And how do we know whether they need more from us or less from us? So I think, in our experience, those 10 themes, and there's a multitude of questions beneath those, but if you can just sit down with your stakeholder group and go through those themes and have a discussion around that, that's a pretty important way of aligning people around what's important. So that's a framework piece. The next piece is about standardization and simplification. Everybody is on a standardization and simplification agenda. But despite however wonderful our systems are, we've all got to be aware that what should happen is not what is happening. And that's, is a big question, because it's not just a compliance question, which is, if it should be happening, it must happen. Arlene talked very eloquently about 5 business units. Do we want all 5 business units to work the same way? And if so, do we want everything to work the same way? Or perhaps it's just the common functions we want to work the same way. So it's important to have an understanding of what we want from standardization and simplification. But then when we know it, it's very important to have a way of identifying what's different, because we know there's a whole bunch of stuff that's different, but how do we identify it? How do we find the tire tracks in our processes, both by business unit, across business units, so we can make some decisions and, again, work out priorities. If we've got data, we can make some informed decisions and set priorities. So that's an important point. So relating to this, so how do we do that? Driving performance, driving standardization, simplification, and the outcomes we want. There is, obviously, we've got to be able to decide the outcomes that we want, the objectives and outcomes. So it may be, these may be the outcomes we're looking for. Better efficiency, so this may be a purchase to pay or source to pay example. We want to maximize the contract value added. We want to optimize working capital and ensure stakeholder satisfaction. These might be the high-level outcomes, but that's not enough to build a vision and a plan and execute. We need to have performance measures. And, there's been many discussions, and we've been part of them with SharedServicesLink on KPIs, but we've got to work out how do we measure the outcomes, which are the lagging indicators. How do we measure that and make sure we're measuring things that we really care about? And then how do we measure the value drivers, the leading indicators? What are the things that help us? And then finally, how do we make sure we identify and measure and explicitly identify the things that are exceptions to the process we need, and therefore we can help make some decisions and change things and make things better. So that's kind of the role of performance measures and analytics. And we ran a very interesting series of learning labs with SharedServicesLink on these topics just recently. So that's worth thinking about. And then we think about analytics. We're trying to drive standardization. So you need that process exception view. We need to work out how to have rapid analytics to work out what the variance is. Again, this is a P2P example, but the same is true for record to report, order to cash, and any other process. What are the things we want to work out where the outliers are, and what does that tell us about the process? What does it tell us about our governance? What does it tell us about our systems? And what are the priorities for changing to drive the efficiency we need? So that's an important element. And then, in terms of another observation, I'd say, optimization, the standardization, simplification piece, it's a process itself. So we're talking about global process ownership, and we need a process on our process, which, with the risk of disappearing down a black hole in the universe, it's worth thinking about. We have a business process. We've got a current assessment of where we are. We've got a target that we're going for, which might be well-defined or loosely defined. We have some view of what's best possible. We've got to assess gaps and opportunities. We've got to to prioritize actions and initiatives, and we've got to do that with a process community led by the global process owner. And then we've got to implement change and drive current more towards our target. And we're not just doing this, these aren't just projects, we're not just doing it one at a time. This has got to be a continuous process. So it's a process of continuous improvement. So again, it's a big challenge for the global process owner, but I think you need this, otherwise there is no meaning to being a global process owner, because we're doing continuous improvement. Which leads to another observation which I think is worth discussing internally. Many organizations have a global process owner that's responsible for the future, and often a global service leader who's often responsible for managing the current. And it is interesting to separate the two, and at least to be clear what it is you want the global process owner to do, whether you want them to do both or just do the one. This is very well articulated by a guy called John Cotter in this book here about the dual operating system in all business processes. So managing for today, you can see the key elements there. That is about robust execution-oriented management. And leading for tomorrow is about establishing direction, building change, exploring, creating, and building a future. And it's not always the same people. You need to work out whether or not you've got, whether your global process owner owns the whole process and performance of it today as well as tomorrow, or whether you separate these things. And as part of stakeholder alignment, you've got to be sure everyone's clear on that, because if you're not clear, it's going to be a story which is not so happy. So we have a chance for you to be involved again. And this is a question about a poll for you. How mature do you believe global process ownership is in your organization? So I'll hand over to Sarah to get this from you, and then we can start bringing it to some conclusions. Sarah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dan. So as Dan said, up on your screen is the third and final poll question of the day. And again, we want to know how mature your global process ownership is in your organization. Would you say you're in an early exploring and you're not really yet looking to implement the model? Are you in the early stages? Are you responsible for ERP-enabled processes? Are you a global process owner? Do you have global process responsibility, but actually don't yet have authority? Or do your global process owners have full responsibility, accountability, expertise, and work clearly defined and aligned? So again, this is a maturity spectrum, so please tick the options that best matches your current situation. Good to see over 60% of you voting, so I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the results will be coming up on your screen. So interesting to see actually a really even spread here across the maturity spectrum. Dan, what do you make of this?
Well, again, I think it's interesting, and I think it's what you would probably expect. I think it's yeah. I think that what's most interesting is global process responsibility without authority. So the RAEW that I referred to in the previous, well, in this poll, is about responsibility, authority or accountability, expertise, and work. And in any initiative, if you're not clear who's got what, then it's usually not successful. So it's interesting to see, and it's not surprising because we're dealing with a new initiative, and a lot of executives are kind of trying to get away with, can you just make these processes better and tell me if you need any help, which kind of, is not it's not a strategy for sustained success, but I do understand why it's there. What I hope, those of you who have global process responsibility without authority, I hope you see in the framework some way of stimulating that discussion with executives about what it is they want, because ultimately full responsibility without authority is a tough place to live. And I think it's interesting. 20% have the full thing, which I think is great. Thank you, everybody. That's really that's some good insight. So I've got some kind of thoughts for the journey, and I've given you some tools and frameworks. I would say, these are things I would definitely leave you with. Stakeholder management, governance, RAEW, as we just discussed, is a critical thing. I know it's hard, but any tools you can use to flush out those discussions at the top level of the organization is critical, because without it, it's going to be an unsatisfying job. So again, I would cast your mind back to that framework. I'd use that framework to drive consensus and a roadmap of priorities. And even getting executives, even making it clear amongst the executive team that they're not in agreement is a good start, because then they've got to sort it out. I would bear in mind that internal control is a key lever, and if you leave that out of your global process ownership picture, you're losing a lever which helps you get things done, and you're also losing some clarity in what it is your purpose is. I would certainly, I'd definitely consider using the framework. I'd definitely use some rapid analytics to identify and eliminate where the outliers are in your processes, eliminate wastage, because that can give you a quick win to drive a business case. Executives are naturally cautious about giving responsibility, authority, money, resources to an initiative. They're not, they're wondering, well, what's it going to deliver? Because it's very difficult for you to tell specifically what the outcome is going to be. So anything you can use to drive the business case with quick wins, and my experience is analytics is a good place to go with that, as it's a framework. I'd also suggest you read John Cotter and Daniel Kahneman, who have given some very, very interesting insights into the behavioral elements of how to make this work, because a lot of this is about the psychology of work and the way executives view these new changes. So these are all things we can help you with. I mean, reading Cotter and Kahneman, that's a link. You can work that. You can see the names yourself. But hopefully that's a useful set of thoughts there. So let's just review what we've covered. We've talked about the context of global process ownership, the varying depths of definition. Arlene's been very helpful in guiding us through the Huntsman journey, both the history, the current process, the vision, and the challenges, which are very, very real when you have a business of 5 discrete divisions. We'll talk a little bit about some of the tools and frameworks that might help at least stimulate the right discussion to get you to the place you want to get to, and those thoughts. And I think now we have a few minutes for some questions, Sarah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Arlene. Just as a final reminder, if you do have any questions for Dan or Arlene, you can submit them to us using the question functionality in your GoToWebinar boxes. First comment and question here is one that's a great presentation, Arlene. And you talked about having a sponsor to help implement change. What would you say are key skills to the sponsor? So Arlene, I'll ask you that, but also then Dan, if you could also comment on this as well.
Since I work directly with different levels of management, I not only look at other GPOs or people that are within different functions, but I've also tried to reach out to senior level people within the IT function. They have a vested interest in having good, responsible global process owners. So I find that working with your IT function and getting your IT senior leadership involved in the understanding of the vision helps tremendously. And with their help, you can actually help drive the motivation to go and develop a structure such as this. I hope that answers the question.
And yeah, for my part, I definitely agree with that. I think you just need sponsorship with the at the CFO level and with the CIO who owns IT, and obviously if you and the head of shared services. Arlene's very fortunate because she works for the head of shared services. That
That's
helps.
true.
But I would say, sponsorship's an interesting thing. You always got to think about ownership, because lots of people can sponsor things, but ownership ultimately, you're talking about a structural change to how you run your business. I would say that if you do not have the CFO foursquare behind it, and probably the CEO, but certainly the CFO, if they're not absolutely bought into it, I think you've got a real issue. Because throughout the change process, we all know the dynamics of change and that people will find ways to, divert, obfuscate, not do stuff, debate, and ultimately somebody's got to drive change, and you do need some teeth in it. And people have got to know, we've had the debate now we're doing it. And you can't afford to have too many people saying, well, yeah, but it's not really your decision, is it? So I would, I do not underestimate with this discussion of global process ownership. I think if the executive committee are not aligned behind it, I think you will always have a hard job executing change. It won't be hard coming up with what the change might be. You'll have a hard job executing it.
That's great answers. Thank you, both of you. Another question, again, I'll put to Arlene first and then to Dan to comment, and that's on really getting the end-to-end processes working. What were some of the things that you're looking to do, particularly in procure-to-pay, to bring finance and procurement together so a GPO can truly own the end-to-end process and not just distinctly in AP and just distinctly in procurement?
Because of where I sit in the organization and I carry that internal controls hammer with me, it's real easy to get the individuals within each one of those particular process ends together. And so I can coordinate them to come together, and we look at a specific, right now we're actually working on an issue within the purchase-to-pay process, and we're looking at a problem and how to solve it. So I've got each one of these individuals involved, and we're documenting their particular part of the process and actually working together to go and say, what is the solution? But we have to start small, but as in, since procure-to-pay and with 5 different divisions, going into that, have different variety of issues, you have to actually get them to all talk off the same page. So we have to start at a smaller site and then work our way into looking at the problem overall globally. So we're actually developing, getting these individuals as we speak, to go and work together as subsets and then work toward a more holistic global approach. Dan?
I would say purchase to pay is a great example, although I guess the other processes have the same challenges. I mean, a lot depends on, in terms of the stakeholder management, what is the mandate for the global process owner? We often talk about P2P, but in a lot of organizations, actually the mandate, because it's sponsored by the head of shared services, the mandate is actually invoice to pay. Or is it purchase to pay, or is it source to pay? And if it's source to pay, you actually have the procurement issues as well. But I think it's important to be clear and not let it be an assumption. What is the scope of the global process you're meant to be owning and managing? So I think that's that is part of the critical elements there. And then you can decide what your end-to-end process is. So if you're a GPO for invoice to pay, trying to work on a global process that deals with sourcing is going to be a tough old game.
Right.
So and there is no doubt at all though that everybody who puts in an invoice to pay global process, they start to realize that when they've cleaned that up, the issue really then is in purchasing and sourcing. So, there's no shame in starting small, absolutely, because once you can prove the value, maybe move it out. But the critical thing is make sure everyone's expectations are aligned. If it's invoice to pay, then the results will be invoice to pay. If it's source to pay, then you need the mandate across the whole organization. So I think a lot comes down to, again, how you start off on this. What is the scope and mandate of the role?
That's great. I think we'll just squeeze in one last question here, and I'll put this to you, Dan. And it's tied to what you just said. This is about reporting and where GPOs are most effective. So, for example, should a source-to-pay GPO report to the Chief Procurement Officer, or should a group of GPOs report directly into senior executive leadership?
That's a really good question. So I know a lot of people have told me that their P2P, for example, their P2P GPO initiative started working really well when they appointed a senior procurement executive to run it, because there is a procurement view of P2P and there's an accounting view of P2P, and they're not quite the same. And so that's kind of, I think the experience and credibility of the person you choose is very important. In fact, that's probably more important than where they report. But then the question is, do they report to the head of global business services, which is what's happening in a lot of organizations? Do they report to the CFO? Do they report to the head of procurement? Now, provided the whole of the executive team is kind of, you've got stakeholders aligned, then the specific reporting, I think, is less significant, provided that all of the executives, CFO, CEO, procurement, business services, are all aligned on the mandate. So if your stakeholder management, so it comes back to this, that's the hardest thing. If you get the stakeholder management alignment piece working, the specific reporting line may not matter, but the person's got to have the teeth to do the job. So even if whether you work for business services, the CFO, the controller, procurement, so long as people know you've got the teeth and you've got the mandate from executive manager to get the job done, then you're in good shape. So I think the critical question is not reporting line, but what is the experience and credibility of the person in the organization that people say, yeah, this person is, they are a respected leader, they have the full force of management behind them, and they know what they're doing.
That's great. Thank you very much. Sorry that we are nearly out of time now, but I would just like to again thank you, Arlene, and thank you, Dan, for some really great insight today. And if we didn't answer your question, we will pass them on to Dan, and hopefully he can get back to you on that one. Please do join us for some future webinars we have coming up that should be relevant for either you or your team, and a number of conferences, and again, might be relevant for you in North America and abroad as well. So thank you for your time today. Again, you can access the slides on www.sharespace.digital, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.